Hello and welcome. This is the Goalers AFL podcast with myself, with Caleb up here. We have seen a lot of games. This is round 13. We are well past the halfway point for the year. The weather has kind of shifted to that nice post-autumn, almost winter kind of weather. You could see some of the games in Melbourne. They were freezing. The Sunday night game with the Carlton Essendon, man, that looked cold. Here in Brisbane, we've had a little bit of a chilly snap, so very, very grateful to have some nice weather. But Caleb, how are you feeling? How did you watch all the games this weekend?
Yeah, good. I'll say I'm not a huge fan of the chilly weather. I much prefer a bit of heat, being a Queenslander through and through. So when it gets to this time of year, I'm definitely wearing more layers than I typically would. But in terms of the football, got to consume all of Thursday, Friday, and Monday football.
Yeah.
And then over the weekend was busy, but I'll say some plenty of big results that we'll get straight into and have lots to dissect about. So it was another entertaining round of football with plenty of upsets, that's for sure.
We will dissect away, and starting off with our first game, we had the Bulldogs and the Hawks. Both of these teams desperately needing a win. The Bulldogs, they currently sit out of the 8. The Hawks, still in the 8, but they had a little bit of a lean patch there, and they got the win 81-59. This was, a tightly contested game for most of it, as you can see by the worm here. But Hawthorn pretty much had control of the game for the most part, but it was still pretty hot. You had the Bulldogs, who are not exactly at full strength right now. They still got a couple of players that could come back, but no, they played really well, and I think that Hawks kind of showed that they still have a little bit of class. And I don't know, it wasn't like the best game. As you can tell, 59-61. The cold's kind of set in. You can tell when it starts to get to that sort of cold time of year that the level of play starts to get a little bit more scrappy because, the ball's hard, the hands are cold, everyone's trying to warm up, that sort of thing. This was played at Marvel Stadium, so it was undercover, but still, you can see a little bit of those skills going down a little bit there. But yeah, good start to the round. How did you see this one?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of intrigue coming into this game because I see both of these teams being pretty even in terms of their play style and their fluidity of movement, and also just how exciting they are to watch. You've got Hockball, Sam Mitchell's exciting brand of football, and then Luke Beveridge has got some really explosive movement with his players running through the midfield. But I think the clear difference between these two teams is just the lack of quality in the Bulldogs forward line.
Yeah.
That was the big thing that stood out to me. They just don't have enough individual brilliance to be able to take the mark or for Crommers to get the ball and slot shots and goals. So I think this game was low scoring, like you mentioned, but I think that was the key difference because in terms of like midfield and defensive pressure and contests in and around the football, it was really like tight. But Hawthorn just have lots of deadly players, and Marbiol Chol played a decent game as well. And when you've got a star forward, it makes a huge difference.
Forward?
I think that was
Chol, star forward? I don't know about that. I don't know if I'd call him a star forward.
In terms of height, it's him and Gunston, and they're the two main players for them up top. So, like, if they're on fire, I think that makes the Hawks a much more deadly outfit. But consistency with a young team like this is always going to be the detriment. If you're not, consistent all year round, then you're going to get in trouble. And that's why the Hawks are no longer in the top 4.
Yeah, they did drop out of the top 4. I was about to say that. So they went down to 5th with this. Even though they won, they still dropped down to 5th with other teams getting wins, which we will talk about coming up. On Friday night, we did have, I think this was another game in Melbourne. Oh, sorry, this was the Adelaide. Oh, gosh, I didn't even want to talk about this game. Thanks for reminding me, Harrison. Yeah, it's been we're recording this on a Tuesday because we wanted to include the game that happened on Monday, and I'm glad we did because that game was very, very good. But man, this game was one I would rather forget. This was Adelaide versus Brisbane. This was very hotly contested. The Lions had a good lead for a fair amount of the game. Man, what do you want to say about this game, Carl? This was really frustrating. You watched it almost in its entirety post the game. I watched it live and then kind of just I don't like watching replays when they lose. So I knew they lost, obviously, but yeah, I've seen some of the scoring shots they should have made. But yeah, this was a pretty bad game from the Lions.
Yeah, look, it's one of those performances where, like, away from home, you can put it down to just being like outside your element. The home crowd advantage for the Crows maybe got them over the line
Yeah.
for the first three quarters. But in the fourth quarter, I think it's very clear that Brisbane threw it away. Like the fact that they had 10
Absolutely.
scoring shots to 5, Adelaide kicked their 5 goals and we didn't kick any.
Yeah.
I think that tells a story in and
Yeah.
itself. But in terms of the game overall over the 4 quarters, like Adelaide were really competitive. They were really strong in the contested football ground, and it was so low scoring at the start because of the wet weather footy. I was thinking to myself, this is going to be a thriller right here,
Yeah.
all the way to the end. And that's pretty much how it turned out. And the fact that Adelaide came out in the fourth quarter and just went bang, 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 and got the crowd back, into the game, and were able to sort of set up the wall and hold on for as long as they could, I think is commendable, because you need to think where Adelaide has come from. Over the last couple of years, they've
Yeah.
been one of those teams that has always been a maybe club, like, and just on the edge, on the fringe of potentially getting into the 8. And that was coming from years of being towards the very, very bottom. So the fact that they've gone on a very similar journey to the Brisbane Lions under Chris Fagan, in the sense that they've gone from rock bottom to a nearly team, to then getting into, the upper echelons of the AFL, and are now looking like a actual contender, I think is worthy of respect. And them getting the job done, like, it is what it is. But I look at it more from a Brisbane Lions perspective,
Yeah.
being like they should have won that game and they threw it away. And Fagan said as much in his press conferences. Like, the journos asked him, like, "Oh, was it the wet weather footy? Was it the
Yeah.
conditions that as to why you didn't win this game?" And Fagan was just pretty blunt and said, "No, we just didn't kick straight. We threw it away."
It's pretty bad. Pretty bad. It's obviously hard to win away from home, but like, I feel like I said this before, that the games that the Lions have lost or drawn are games that they probably should have won, except for maybe the Collingwood game. So that's 3 games that you could have won. But then on the flip side, you could say that there's a lot of games they probably should have lost, like even against Essendon last week. So it's been that kind of weird sort of season so far. Not really sure how to think about it. One thing I did want to point out, if you can see right at the end, that very incremental small drop, like right, you know how you kind of have the peaks and the valleys, very sharp 90-degree angles with goals. That just dropping away, that's just the points that the Lions kept scoring. And I was just
Yeah,
like, oh. And
it's a
sometimes
tough graphic to look
you've
at.
got to take those opportunities, especially Lockie Neal. He would probably be absolutely kicking himself if he didn't kick that goal. But anyway, the
Oh yeah.
Lions still sit in second spot, but now they are 2 points behind, 2 points ahead, of the Adelaide Crows, who sit in third. So it wasn't like we lost to like a really bad team. It's just one of those kind of games that you probably would have liked to have won. And I think they'll bounce back playing GWS next week. I think it'll be still a great game, and the Lions should bounce back very nicely. But that was the Friday night game in Adelaide. Moving on to our Saturday slate, 2 of the lesser teams of the year so far is the Tigers and the Sydney Swans. 36-80 was the final score. You can see the Tigers are very inaccurate, 4-12.
That's shocking.
Kind of just belies kind of the youngness of the team, the inexperience. Like they had they were down by 14 points at halftime, and Sydney just kicked away right at the end. I think the Tigers did have a lead at the first break, 22-16 there, but Sydney Swans just kind of, even though they've had a very bad year, I think they're still good enough to beat teams like Richmond. So there's very clearly a huge gap between the bottom 3 teams and then like the middle pack, and Richmond is still
I
very
agree with
much in
that.
the bottom. So yeah, what did you think about this one?
Well, I didn't get to watch it, unfortunately, but it's one of those results where you look at Sydney and you think to yourself, with the quality that they've got, they should be really burying Richmond like 6 feet under the ground. And the fact that they only scored 80 points, like, I know it's a 44-point victory, but again,
Yeah.
Richmond's severely inaccurate. So if they kicked their goals, it could have been tighter.
Yeah.
So look, I don't know. The Swan season, not much of my opinion has changed from last week, where I've written them off. I think this season is pretty much over for them. They've got a lot of problems that they're going to have to find solutions for, and hopefully they figure it out quick, because next season they can't have a season like this. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another kind of I guess, growing moment for the Tigers. I think that, having leads in quarters and such will probably help them in the long run. But yeah, this was definitely a disappointing to not show a little bit more fight at the end for the Tigers. But we did have another Saturday game, which was down at GMHBA Stadium. And again, the low scoring affairs kind of was the theme of this round. So far, up to this point, all four games of the first part of the round, no one had scored over 100 points. And a couple of the games only just cracked 100 total. So this was a very, very tight and contested game. You can see the changes here. Geelong pretty much had the lead for most of the game. There was a moment where they were tied, especially going around the middle part of the second quarter. But I just think that the Suns are still very inexperienced playing away from home, and I think.
Well, how cold was it down there? Like it was borderline snowing.
Yeah, it was
very. So like from a weather perspective, much different to the Gold Coast.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those you take the home advantage of being hot in like the start of the season, the end of the season, but you've also got to go to places where it's cold like that, and I think AFL players like playing in the cold. It's not like they're like not used to it. A lot of the guys from the Suns will have been living and growing up in Victoria, so it's not like they've never played in the cold before, but obviously not playing in it all the time is not their usual mode, and I think that Geelong just kind of had the goods too much, and they've moved up to fourth now, and Gold Coast did they? Yeah, Gold Coast dropped out of the 8 as well. They're in the fifth. No, it dropped out of the top 4. Sorry, they're in fifth, and the Cats jumped up into the top 4. So yeah, anything else about this game? It was a pretty dull affair, to be honest.
Well, I was going to say, I think the fact that Geelong won this game is, again, a testament to their ability at their home stadium. And the fact that Gold Coast, couldn't get the job done in the cold. I don't think I'm going to cast too much judgment upon that because, we've talked about this in previous weeks, when Gather Round was on and then when those games in Darwin were happening, like, teams that are from more further north have the experience of playing in the humidity, and that's an advantage. Whereas the teams more south have an advantage playing in the cold. Yep. And, Gold Coast won their games in the heat and they lost a game in the cold. And the Cats are the reverse. So, look, I think this result says pretty much everything that it says on the tin. Geelong with a better team, Gold Coast couldn't get the job done.
Fair enough. Well, there was one more game on the Saturday. Again, there was 2 teams on a bye this week, so one less game, and also a game on a Monday. So it was a little bit spread out on the Saturday, which we usually have. The most amount of games. We only had 3 on, and this one was Port Adelaide getting a very sloppy win. This was in Canberra, which was even colder. I think it was like 5 degrees there.
Oof, that's rough.
Yeah, it was pretty cold there in Canberra. But yeah, a little bit of a seesaw affair. The Giants had a bit of a lead for a little bit, made it close, but then Port just kind of kicked away. I think this is one of those games, we've spoken about a couple of these games that it's going to be forgotten at the end of the year. I think that this was one of those very, again, sloppy games, not a huge amount of great skills shown. Port Adelaide kind of keeping their season alive, playing for their jobs type of thing. Pretty desperate, and got GWS still on that seesaw, that up and down, that roller coaster of a season that they're constantly
like
being
Flake
on.
Mantle.
Yeah, we'll get onto we'll get to them a bit later, but yeah, this was not exactly a banner game. Did you see any highlights from this one?
No, I did not. But I will be honest, I am surprised by this result.
Okay,
I thought GWS, in terms of what I've seen so far from them this season, have been much better than Port Adelaide. I've only seen Port Adelaide play one good game this season, and that was against Adelaide. So I've not been that impressed. So I thought Port Adelaide making the trip up to Canberra, there were no chance.
Yeah.
But the fact that they got the job done by 16 points is, like you said, they're keeping their season alive somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was very surprised.
I think they would say that their best game was against the Hawks in Gather Round. That's probably the game that they would probably put up as their best game. But this was obviously incredibly
pretty bad in that
needed.
Game. So
yeah. This, I don't know. There was a wave going on in that game. So we'll move on to the Sunday game, which is the first game ever played at Bunbury, which is about an hour south of Perth. The North Melbourne Kangaroos. Well, I'm going to start calling them the Australian Kangaroos because they have like 3 home grounds now, and they're playing this game against West Coast, who obviously were the away team, but had a lot more home fans because it was only an hour away from Perth. So the game was very much dominated by West Coast fans, and for a lot of the game, it was North all the way. West Coast did not have a great game at the start, but then they kicked away at the end, and then just right at the end, as you can see with the graphic, North Melbourne pipped them very, very close. Man, this was actually a very good game. Like, it's one of those, you look at it, it was not exactly a game that you would think would be good, but it actually kind of lived up a little bit to some of the hype. But this game, the thing that I got from it was that West Coast was super inaccurate. Obviously, 6-16. I think they were 112
That's
and
bad.
just the pressure on the goal kicks were just mounting and mounting and mounting. And obviously, being the pseudo home team, like, they're not really the home team, but all their fans obviously are there, and they're like, "Come on, guys! Like, what are we doing? We're playing a team who we are hopefully on the same level, if not, trying to be better than." And they just
Yeah, this is a game you come into
yeah.
as a fan. You're like, oh, I hope we win this one.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the Eagles probably should have won it, but yeah, the Kangaroos just had a little bit too much juice at the end there, and it kind of shows that they are a little bit. I talked about we had the different tiers, and like there's like Richmond, North, and West Coast, and I think even West Coast are even below those two. They're just so bad that they're even below those two
Yeah.
bad teams. So yeah, it's a little bit sad, but anyway, West Coast, you'll get better. It'll be fine. They're a powerhouse club, just a little bit down at the moment. And North getting another win, although be it against a bad team. But yeah, any other thoughts on this game?
Nah, I had little interest coming into the weekend watching this fixture, and I'm glad it was a good game for the neutral, but
Yeah.
nah, I couldn't care less.
Fair enough. Well, there was another good game for the neutral here, which was at the MCG. The Carlton Blues winning 78-70. It was probably about 75,000 at the MCG. It was very cold, so there was probably a lot of people who didn't want to go and brave the cold, especially for two teams that aren't exactly in good form or in the top 8. You got Carlton, who had actually a very good lead. I think they were like up by 35, and then they slowly chipped away, did Essendon, and slowly kind of got back in the game. And then towards the end, there was a little bit of a surge, but overall, Carlton pretty much
Yeah,
had this
wow.
game kind of on lock. And kind of weird being a Sunday night game, 7:20 on a Sunday. I was like, oh, okay, I could get used to
And at
this.
the AG as well, which is a bit bizarre.
Yeah. Well, it was public holiday in Victoria yesterday, so for the King's birthday, that's why they had obviously the game, which we'll talk about next, was the King's birthday game, public holiday, so they could afford to have those night games. But yeah, this was hotly contested, and I think if either one of these teams had lost, I think a lot of people would be considering their season over, even if they were going to make top 8. I just think it's one of those like benchmark games. If Carlton won, which they did, their season's still alive. Essendon, if they won, they'd be like, okay, we can beat those teams in the lower part, but I don't think they're still good enough, especially with this performance, to get anywhere near the top 4, even if they do make the finals. So this is going to be a game that was hotly contested, obviously, Carlton Essendon, but it wasn't very well skilled either, and Carlton pretty much had the lead most of the time, as you can see by the graphic.
Isn't that just so surprising though? Because like these clubs, like with the history and the development that they've been on over the last couple of years, you thought really like this was the year that both these teams are going to explode in the competition and really showcase what they're capable of. But both of them have underwhelmed so significantly. It's really quite incomprehensible. And the fact that Essendon were able to sort of bring it back and be somewhat respectable at 8-point margin, it's like, okay, but I think your assessment is pretty accurate in the sense that, yeah, like they're both middling teams. They're not going to be pushing towards the upper echelons. And if one of these teams makes it into the 8 at the end of the year, that is a story. But I don't think, as of right now, with their current form, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet on either of them getting into the 8.
I don't think incomprehensible is even a word. There
Incomprehensible.
you go.
Sorry. Classic.
Well, the last game of the round was probably the best game of the round, which was the Collingwood Magpies defeating Melbourne by 1 point. Ugh, so frustrating.
Bloody Collingwood, man.
Bloody Collingwood. Yeah, like Melbourne had the lead in the last quarter, which was wild. The Magpies got out to like a 25-point lead, and then the Demons just came back, chipped away, had the lead, and then Collingwood just got, the needed goals at the end and they just staved it off. The umpires tried their hardest to push them to victory. Man, they gave some free kicks to Collingwood that were just terrible. And then Max Gawn had a very bad, with about 30 seconds left, he turned the ball over and finished the game.
Oh, yeah. Not his fault, though. Not
No,
his fault.
no one would fault him. He was an
Like,
absolute.
they've got 30 seconds left on the clock, and he's like, Hail Mary, is
Yeah.
it shank the boot? Like, yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't blame him. And then, the scenes that everyone's seen is the Stephen May giving him a bit of spray at the end, and Gawn's like, get out of here, I'm not having it. And I'm like, yeah. Good on
Rightfully
you.
so.
No one
Because he played really well. Really well. Didn't deserve to get stick at the end.
I don't even know if Stephen May's mother likes him, honestly. Like, he's just terrible. He's just terrible. He's, a decent football player, but man, Anyway, less said about him, the better. But man, I think all kind of credit is to go to Collingwood, I suppose. As much as I hate to say that, continuing to stay on top of the ladder, pushing away from a game clear, another game clear from Brisbane there. Anyway, I think that this game was, of course, the highlight was the MND, like the motor neuron disease round with Neil Danaher. It was number 11 for the Big Freeze this year, fighting against this disease. This was kind of it has like an almost Anzac Day grand final Dreamtime type of feel. It's one of those standalone games. A lot of pomp, a lot of ceremony, that sort of thing. So it was a good game to watch. Let's just say that, even though it wasn't a public holiday here,
absolutely,
it was a good game. What did you think of it?
Well, that's the thing, man. Like, coming into the game, I was like, I don't really care about this and who wins and whatnot, especially because of where their table difference was. And then you texted me being like, oh, this game might be over by half time. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe.
Yeah.
And then that first half happened, and I was like, you know what? Melbourne are really up for the fight here. I like how they tagged Dacos really fiercely. Like, they didn't give him any space to move in that first three quarters. They really shut him down. But then in that fourth quarter, Collingwood just had enough composure to sort of get them over the line. Dacos was able to get, on the scoreboard and make an impact. And the best players always do, despite how much they get shut down from a tag. But I'll tell you what, though, man, I'm not a fan of Collingwood. I do not like them in the slightest. And in that fourth quarter, when Cozzy Pickett kicked that goal to get them in front, I cheered way too loudly for a neutral. I cheered way too loudly. I was like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
And then, this, unfortunately, they just couldn't hang on. But look, a lot of respect for Melbourne, because the way they performed in this game, I think, is how they should be performing all season long.
Yeah.
With the team they've got and the coach they've got, this is how good Melbourne Football Club can be.
Yeah.
So the fact that they had a shocking start to the season and have been not getting results along the way, I think has been the storyline around this team for so long. But yeah, Collingwood, it is what it is. They got the job done, and that's the reason why they're top of the table.
Yeah, I think that this game is one that, I love the close result, love it as a neutral. If I was a Melbourne fan, I would be very, very disappointed, very annoyed, be very, very frustrated. And that kind of leaves us with a ladder that is looking like this. Collingwood, as I said, on top. Another game clear, so they are 6 points ahead on top of the ladder. I think it's pretty much sewn up that they're going to finish top of the ladder, I would say. Brisbane there in second, Adelaide very close behind them, tied with Geelong, 36 points. And then you have two teams on 32, the Suns and the Hawks, and then GWS and Freo, another win behind them. Anything that stands out to you from this ladder so far, from the top 8?
The fact that Hawthorn and Gold Coast have dropped down to where they are in the top 8, I think is about right.
Yeah.
I think both those teams probably deserve to be in that sort of area, and I wouldn't be surprised if both those teams continue to drop.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think that leaving us with a bottom half that looks a bit like this, and then we've got the GWS. Also, I forgot to say that Freo didn't play this week, so they're still sitting there in 8th despite not having a win, and they're also one game behind everyone else, along with Gold Coast in that top 8. Bottom 10, we have West Coast, Essendon, Carlton, St Kilda, all on 12 games, so just below. And then you've got the kind of jumble there of, Carlton, St Kilda, Sydney and Melbourne and Port all on 20 points. And then you've got the North Melbourne, Richmond, West Coast slum down the bottom. So it's looking like the bottom, I'm going to say from 12 down are pretty much done for the year. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I don't know. That's a tough question. Look, it's so hard to predict these things, as we'll see with what we're going to discuss very shortly. But look, the Western Bulldogs, they need to win against St Kilda. Like
Yeah,
they are so much better than where they are on the table right now,
yeah.
and they've just got to start picking up wins against teams that are near them.
Hmm.
So that's going to be a huge battle, and I'm excited to see how this sort of mid-table battle continues over the rest of the season.
Yep. So I thought to wrap it up this week, we'd have a little bit of a look back at the start of the season when we did a bit of a ladder prediction episode, and we'd have a look and see what where we are just past the halfway point. Let's bring that one up. So this was the prediction that we had for our ladder, and then we also had the top of the ladder here. So we'll kind of go through a little bit piece by piece. We were pretty close on the pies, I think. I had them in fourth, you had them in third. Brisbane again, second, fourth. That was pretty standard. Crows, I think
In the ballpark.
we were both very wrong for the Crows. That was a bit of a miss there. You had them in 13th. I had them in ninth. So, I mean, this isn't the finished ladder, but they're definitely higher than what everyone thought they were going to be. Geelong, pretty close to where we kind of thought. Gold Coast, you had them there. I didn't even have them in the 8. So, a little bit of a surprise. Hawks, you kind of had them actually almost bang on, one spot away, which is pretty good. I had them in 11th, which might still happen, but probably not, probably won't. Um, Gold Coast, GWS, I was somewhat close. I'm only one spot away there, but you were way off, unfortunately. They could still slide, but yeah, a little bit off there. Eighth, you were only one spot away from them, and I was, so seventh and ninth was where we had Frio, who are currently sitting in eighth. So anything that stands out to you with that one so far?
Well, the fact that I put Essendon up so high, obviously, I was going on with a feeling
Yeah,
coming into the season, and so far they have not lived up to that expectation in my head. Whereas on your table, they probably are about right, 13th. But look, there's still lots of movement to be had for the rest of this season. Obviously, there's a few teams which you can write off, in that being Carlton, obviously, Sydney Swans. But in terms of who's going to be creeping into the 8, based off our predictions,
hmm,
like I've still got Gold Coast to stay in there, Hawthorn to stay in there. And then obviously you've got Freo that's going to be sneaking in.
hmm.
And then GWS, who are going to be rounding out the top 8 with your predictions. So, look, there's a couple teams in there which are like floating
Yeah,
and look like they could be correct with our guesses, but like it's so hard to predict these things. And the fact that we had a couple teams that are way off is obviously quite fun
yeah,
and quite embarrassing. But the teams that we have got in the ballpark is pretty awesome. So yeah,
yeah.
we'll see
So
how it looks at the end of the season.
pretty close, but obviously the season's not over yet, and we'll just quickly look at the bottom of the ladder just to round it out. Where are we? I had that one there. There it is. So we got the Bulldogs in ninth spot, which I had them. Where did I have them? I had them in 12th. You had them in 12th. So, sort of close. Essendon, I think we were somewhat close. You were pretty far off. I was all right there in 13th. And then we had Carlton, who I was way off. We were both way off. 1 and 2 we had them, and they're way down. But that's been the story of their season or so far. St Kilda, somewhat close. Actually, I think you're only one away, and I'm pretty close. So, good work there. Melbourne, both kind of off there. Port Adelaide, I was way off. You were a bit more close on that one. All credit to you there. And North Melbourne, pretty close, 16th. You're actually bang on there in 16th. So there you go. I was 15th, so close enough. Richmond, not quite there. West Coast, not quite there either.
But the
I
fact that
had
we
them.
both had North Melbourne, West Coast, and Richmond as our sort of bottom of the barrel teams,
Yeah,
I think coming into the season, that was a pretty easy guess. And
yeah,
it's a bit disappointing that that guess has come to fruition.
yeah. I mean, it was sort of easy to tell. I think what the season was going to look like for those teams. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. But yeah, we are round 13, and then we'll have a look at some of the standout games from round 14. You have St Kilda versus Western Bulldogs. Thursday night, you got the Hawks and Crows, which will be a good game on Friday. Saturday, 1:20 is the Lions at home at the Gabba against GWS. Essendon against Geelong Cats. Another game that I think that Geelong should probably win. North against Freo on the night game at Optus Stadium, actually. Is this right? North playing at
Yep.
Optus Stadium. Oh, that's right. They did take a home game away from the. All right. North Melbourne, again, this is why I'm calling them the Australian Kangaroos. They're playing at Optus Stadium as the home team
Yeah, I know. That is a bit
against
weird.
Freo, who are the away team. It's very odd.
That doesn't make any
It doesn't
sense.
make any sense to play those teams. Again, you
Who's
have two.
running the AFL?
You have two. Yeah, no one at the moment. They got two teams on four teams on a bye, so two less games. So we've got the Suns, the Pies, Sydney, and Richmond on a bye. So you got Port Adelaide and Melbourne playing again on the Sunday afternoon, and then West Coast and Carlton to finish off the round. So not a huge amount of great games this weekend, but again, like we saw with the the North Melbourne West Coast game, just because the teams are low down on the ladder doesn't mean it's not going to be a good game. So, still some potential there, and I think that hopefully the Lions should get back on form against GWS. So that's what we're hoping and looking out for. Any sort of call outs from the round? Anything that you've been liking around the AFL scene at the moment?
No specific call outs with regards to the last round, but all I'll say to wrap up my thoughts is Tasmania Football Club better bloody happen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will be severely disappointed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yes, I think so. I think that's going to be an interesting development. I think it will go ahead. It's too big to. I think it's too big to fail. I think that the AFL is so much.
Don't underestimate
in
the
it.
stupidity of Australian politicians, Harry.
Yeah,
So,
Tasmania politics are a bit odd.
I hope you're right, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's going to be interesting. And again, thank you so much to everybody for watching. Thank you so much for Caleb for joining me. And we're going to continue doing this all throughout the year. And we're going to get very close to finals. And hopefully we can show our ladder prediction and be, a little bit more correct. Some teams are going to fall. Some teams are going to rise. Some teams hopefully are going to stay the same so that we can be right for our predictions. But thank you so much to everybody for watching. We'll see you in round 14. Have a good one.